Hi, my name is Tim Wan and I'm the course coordinator for HRMT19014, and this course concerns human resource planning, recruitment and selection. So we're really going to spend some time this term over the next 12 term weeks looking at best practice recruitment and selection of candidates to join an organisation. And week one, which we'll talk about shortly and I'll narrate the slides for you for that week, is really about this thing called strategic HRM, which is strategic HR management. And we really need to get to grips with that term strategic and what that means. So week one, as I mentioned before, is really about getting to grips with this thing called strategic human resource management. So here you'll see the opening slide for the week. If you move through the slides, we'll start here at what is strategic human resource management. And there's two key concepts that underlie modern human resource management. They are employees as human resources, and some people even refer to it as human capital. And what that means is looking at human beings as how they coordinate and organize themselves with other resources, other factors of production to provide outcomes for stakeholders and consumers that provides value to those stakeholders and consumers, and so that the business is sustainable. And it's really about integrating human resources into the production chain, into the output chain for the business. And the second element of human resource management is the long-term integrative and accountable strategic process. And there are many components to that process, and we'll look at these as we go through the week's slides. But before we start, I'd like to take a bit of a detour and talk about what strategy is. And I thought the best way that I could do this is through my own experience and how I learned what strategy was. And when I was a graduate in 1992 and got my first job, I actually got a job in a strategic development unit with the Department of Transport. And my title, or my first role, was as a strategy officer. So why don't I take you through what I did in that role and how I understood what the term strategic means. So what I did each day, I think I can categorize into three main areas, and that is I talked to people in the department and found problems that they were having. Now, this was not an easy thing, and I'll talk about that shortly. The second thing I did was I quantified those problems and worked out how much cost they were adding to all stakeholders, and probably in this sense I looked at all Queenslanders. So every resident of Queensland, because I worked for a state department, I looked at the impact that these costs were having on all different Queenslanders, whether they worked in or outside the department, were customers or not customers of the particular area where we were looking at this particular problem. And then the third element was to define a path that everyone could travel down, stakeholders, people in the department, customers and clients, to solve those problems. So talking to people and finding problems was perhaps the most challenging aspect of what I did. And the problems that they would tell me about were not really problems. And possibly the reason that they were so obscure about any real problems that they were having in the department is that they liked to say that everything was okay, that everything was well managed. They told positive responses and positive answers to me about how they felt things were going in their particular area. And I think the thing that they were fearful of is if they admitted the truth and told the problems that they were having, it would lead to change in their jobs and their job environment. And I suppose the main thing that people were concerned about is that they might become redundant or their position no longer required if they were absolutely truthful about the problems that clients were having, the problems that they were having, and they felt that change was possibly a negative thing. So a lot of people decided that it was better not to speak. So it required a lot of communication skills from me. I had to talk to a lot of people simultaneously. I had to talk to them in their own environments, in their offices, sometimes in my office, in coffee shops, and finding people at conferences to talk to. So a whole range of people, and you finally sort of started to get an idea of what the problem was and how much it might be costing people. So that was the hardest part, actually locating the problem. And it took a lot of coffees to actually get to find those problems. So then we came to quantification, which is actually adding up the cost that this particular problem had for all stakeholders. And whether those stakeholders were in or outside the department, whether they were overseas or residents of the state, because the area I worked in had an international aspect where it involved shipping, and people visiting, ships visiting the shores of Queensland and their ports. And some of the things that we had to change involve consultation with international shipping. So then we had to define a path that everyone was happy to travel down to solve the problems, and there was resistance at certain points, and that had to be overcome. It was like an obstacle that had to be managed, and sometimes this path was changed and rebuilt as we traveled down the path to the solution being provided. So what is strategy? Well, it's a way through to solve problems, a way of forward thinking about anticipating what might be coming up. And in a HRM context, it's about all of the things that could impact your business in terms of HR into the future, and finding problems and solutions and solving them before they become critical. So it's a long-term process. It's integrative. That means that there are a lot of people working together in lots of different teams with lots of different specialities to provide outcomes that are great for HRM and best practice. And it's an accountable process because it's measurable, and it's defined, and there are outcomes and dates that must be achieved and significant events that must happen in order for the strategy or the strategic HRM process to work effectively and to be best practice. So that's those things that we talk about in the definition: integrative, accountable, strategic process that's long term. So back to the concepts underlying strategic HRM. We've talked about both of these. You'll find these in the textbook, and I encourage you to read those first 16 pages, chapter 1 of the text, to prepare for this week. And when we consider employees as human resources, what HRM is involving itself with there is a perception that employees are human resources, that they are involved in the production process, that the production process can't happen without them, that they are definitely required. If it's not a producing industry or manufacturing industry and it's a service-based industry, well, those HR resources, human capital, are vital in order to succeed and provide that service ultimately to customers that customers are going to value and be delighted with. And HR managers must promote the contribution of employees, both actual and potential. HRM is also concerned with the effective and efficient management of an organisation's employees towards the achievement of desirable objectives and goals. And it's really important that the organisation has confirmed these objectives and goals. And if we were talking about a firm or a company listed on the ASX, then you would be able to find their objectives and goals as part of their annual report. Here we have a diagram taken from the text. It's recruitment as a strategic HRM tool. What I'd particularly like you to look at here is how the dynamic environment impacts on the vision and the strategic business plan and the key stakeholders. These are not necessarily employees, they could be, but they are people that value the output of the firm and have a say in how the firm goes about its production or service process. And then we see how that is linked to human resource strategy, and then human resource plans and policies. And then these might be some of the smaller tasks that are allocated and have a strategic aspects, things from job design through to employee relation strategies. Now, what I particularly like to sort of point out at this particular point is diversity management plans. That's becoming very important, that organisations have a plan for managing diversity and the conflict that comes along with diversity. They also have to have this aspect of career development and succession plans if important key employees move on and find other careers in other areas. And that leads to strategic organisational outcomes, performance, productivity, effectiveness, cost effectiveness and profitability. These are the accountable aspects of strategic HRM. And then this, all working together, best practice will achieve business outcomes. I also want you to understand from the text the horizontal and vertical environment and the impact it has, and internal and external fit. Here is the AHIRI model of excellence, and it talks about objectives and capabilities. Please become familiar with that diagram and how it drives success, and how new skills, especially in the information technology, telecommunications and accounting areas, need to be acquired by HR managers. HR managers in the past may not have had to develop these skills, but in today's environment it's very important that you have an understanding of how accounting works, how technology and telecommunications can impact and make your job more efficient and effective. So, best practice selection and recruitment processes. And there's three real elements to this. You have to know what you want as a HR manager and where to get it. Have to be able to plan ahead. You don't want your marketing manager leaving and she leaves behind an environment that needs organisation, and then you start, once she's left on the Friday, looking for a new person on the Monday. You must have talent recognition and talent acquisition as part of your strategic toolbox as a HR manager, and you have to know where your key people, where you could source people for your key jobs in your organisation should someone fall ill, should someone move on to another job or career. So being able to specify the required skills, attitudes and interpersonal skills to perform the jobs. So you've got to be good at job design, you've got to understand what the job is so that you can design tools to find the right person for the job. You've got to provide appropriate challenges. You've got to provide an authentic, exciting working place for people so that they stay connected with you and they stick to their job. Development, rewards and opportunities must be built in. You must have adequate remuneration systems that are comparable with what other competitors are offering. And you must have a way of monitoring what other competitors are offering your employees, or otherwise you'll leave key strategic positions open to headhunting by other competitors in your industry. And you've got to ultimately have a way of satisfying and measuring that satisfaction to motivate qualified applicants to apply for jobs. So getting data about their experience of your selection and recruitment processes will really help you to design best practice systems. So the business plan, well, the business plan is very, very important. It's often a confidential document that's not shared with the public, even for an ASX company right down to a partnership or sole trader. But it reinforces existing corporate strategies, it signals and reinforces changes in corporate strategies. It's used as an input into the strategic planning process. Now there has to be horizontal and vertical alignment of HR. Read your text for further clarification of that. It has to contain things like management goals, strategies, policies and functions, and the business plan, a well-planned and well-organised business plan is crucial for success. The strategic planning process, this comes directly from the text, and you'll see by reading the text, the first 16 pages, what we're talking about there. So benefits of human resource planning. There is significant benefits of HR planning, including the provision of clear linkages between HR functions and organisational objectives. You should be able to make a clear link against any initiative that you propose to your senior management board, saying that this is a good idea because it serves this organisational objective from our business plan. It will help us get closer to our goals. So always linking your initiatives with those plans from the business plan will help you to get agreement from senior management to head in the direction that you suggest. More focused sourcing of workers from both traditional and non-traditional labour markets. You must be across the whole range of sources or supply of labour into the future. You have to anticipate what you might need, and you have to know where you can get it. Cost-effective recruitment and selection strategies. It's very important you design cost-effective recruitment and selection strategies, because then they'll be sustainable. Systematic and responsive HR policies and practices in all areas is definitely a major priority and one of the significant benefits of human resource planning. Recruitment in HR planning. Well, important 3 things to remember here. You need to account for labour turnover, natural attrition. People will retire, people will move on. You need to have an understanding of how much that occurs in your industry and how many new people you might have to recruit. You'll also have to have an eye on short-term growth, what your short-term growth objectives are, and also what your long-term growth objectives are. Both should be defined in the planning and business plan, strategic planning documents of the organisation that you work for. If it doesn't have such a document, very important as a HR manager that you push to have something like that put in place. A vision statement, a mission statement, an idea of what the business is really about. If you don't have that as a HR manager, you have to go back to square one and make sure the business develops that. HR planning for recruitment. Well, it's really understanding the labour market for your industry. When can you find people? When is it competitive to locate people? If you're in a seasonal industry like small crops, you'll have to understand the labour market. It will be more complex than, say, for a professional stream of solicitors, where you know that graduates come out of university around October, November, December, January of each year, and that's where you can centre some of your recruiting strategies, if not before. But you need to understand the labour market that you're dealing with. You need to develop a skills inventory for your organisation to make sure that you have all the things necessary. If you are exporting to China or to Thailand and you don't have someone in your firm who speaks the appropriate language and understands cultural difference in those countries, then perhaps that's something you need to acquire and something that you could target through a skills inventory. If you're planning to focus your growth overseas and export to other nations, it would be handy to have someone who understood cultural differences and the language of your target customers. Labour turnover analysis. You really have to understand how much attrition occurs naturally in your organisation. So if you've got administration staff, how often do they retire? Is it about 10% that's replaced each year? Your turnover analysis will allow you to understand that. And you have to have an eye on career and succession planning. People move on, people change jobs, get new careers, so you have to have an eye on how you provide the right environment that makes people happy, that is ahead of your competitors, and that is attractive to acquire new hires. You'll need to link recruitment and selection with your strategic business plan. We talked about this earlier, and saying that if you want agreement from senior management, so from the marketing manager, from the logistics manager, from the chief financial officer and the CEO, you better make sure that any proposal that you make as a HR manager is linked to the strategic business plan. If they can see a link to that plan that's pre-agreed, then they are going to be very happy to support you in your next initiative. If you don't make that link, they're really not going to see how it benefits the organisation as a whole. Next, we have an activity for you to complete, and for students who are not aligned with a campus, I encourage you to do this activity just along with every other student and post your findings on the discussion forum. So there's an article there. There's also, if you can't use that link on the slide, the article is repeated in the Moodle week. And you'll see there that I ask a question about Gina Reinhardt and her strategic business plan. and her strategic business objective at the moment, which is to cut pay for the Roy Hill workers. So I'd like your comments on what you think as a strategic choice and how that would have been arrived at, and whether that is a sound strategic option for the business that Gina Reinhardt is in. So that's the end of the week 1 lecture slides. It's about 20 minutes. If there's any further clarification that you need about any aspects that we've talked about today, then please send me an email or post a question on the Q&A forum. Alright, there's some readings to do for week 1 as well. There's a video to watch. Make sure you do all of those aspects for week 1 and you'll be really prepared for week 2. Alright, take care. Have a great week, students.